Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode. Today, I have Angela Priest back, my co founder of Almami, and we are going to talk about personality. Why is it important to show personality in your application, but also why is it important to be your authentic self once you're on the job? Because it's important wherever you go, something that is not much talked about, but Angela is very well positioned to talk about this topic. She brings a wealth of knowledge from her experience in industry, and I will just introduce Angela quickly and then you can add on. But I want to introduce it because I know you will do it in a more humble way. Angela has worked in industry for over 25 years, has worked in hiring for plus 20. She has built high performing teams from startup to big corporate and has always been on the people side. Welcome, Angela, to
You.
today's coffee chat.
Yay,
Yay.
I'm excited.
Would you like to add something to your experience? Please do.
I think you did well. So, my background is really in business operations, which is basically like, how do organizations work and how do we make them work better? And a lot of what I've done is around the people side, because ultimately, if you have great people and you empower them, then they're going to do great things for your business. So that's kind of how I came to be doing what I'm doing. A lot of people look at my background and they go, oh, it's a little bit kind of crazy because you have Lean Six Sigma, which is this like really structured process kind of organization type thing. And then I also have my master's degree in marriage and family therapy, which is kind of the fluffy side for a lot of people, which seems like a contrast, but not really when you understand that, the dynamics of an organization, the interpersonal dynamics are really what drive it.
I think it's something a lot of us forget often. An organization is not a building. It's made out of people. So in order to be a successful organization or business, you need the right people in the right places. And I think why we came to talk about this topic, and I realized it really resonates with a lot of PhDs. Whenever I go out or you go out and talk, what gets stuck with a lot of PhDs and postdocs is really bring your personality. Bring your personality in your CV, show who you are, and bring your personality in the interview, share some things that are somewhat personal but related to the job. For many PhDs, a new concept, and I think they're afraid of oversharing. Is this too personal? And where should I draw the line? So I would really love to talk to you. You have hired many people in your life, so you really know what matters in that context. So what is your opinion about showing personality in your CV and what is a good way of doing it?
I think, first off, I just kind of want to talk about what you opened up with, which is a lot of people are scared to show who they are in a work context. We're socialized to think that the concept of professional is different than the concept of personal. But when you look at the people who do really, really well in an industry context, it's usually the people who are really authentic. And I learned that in my career. I came up in the workforce in very traditional sectors. So I was in data and technology, but it was in the automotive sector, which is a very kind of traditional area of the market. A lot of kind of entrenched ways of thinking, of doing. And so there was this concept of you have to be the consummate professional in those spaces. And there was a point in my career where I kind of plateaued. And this is related. I'm going to bring this back around to the second question you asked, which is about the resume and how do you bring that forward. But there was a point in my career where I kind of plateaued and I was really, really struggling because I was in my first big leadership role and I had this impression of what it meant to be a leader. And I was trying to model myself off of the leaders that I had seen. But I was really, really struggling with the team. I was getting feedback that was in one side of the equation militantly positive. So when I tried to do what I thought was motivation, it really didn't come across well. Walking around and high-fiving people and doing all of that stuff, it did not land well with the team. Militantly positive, I'll never forget that. And then on the other side of the equation, when I would get in front of the team, I would get feedback from some of my direct reports, the managers who reported into me, that was, you're really warm one-to-one, but you're cold when you get in front of the group, which when you're a person like me who's highly motivated by helping people and the people you're trying to help seemingly don't appreciate it, which wasn't the case. They were trying to tell me something about my style that was just not landing well. And even some of my executives who were evaluating my performance at the time would say things like, you're really indexed towards what's good for the company, and you're not indexing enough towards what's good for the people, which is mind-blowing because every decision I was making was literally, I felt, in the interest of my team. And what really came out, I had a really great manager myself at the time who basically told me, you need to be more authentic in the way that you're coming across. Translate that to vulnerable. I came up in a space where vulnerability wasn't necessarily something that was appreciated, and it was a very political environment. So when you were vulnerable, certain things could be weaponized against you. And so coming into a leadership role where authenticity is kind of the thing that makes you effective, that was really hard to kind of think about and conceptualize. And I think many academics run into the same thing, coming up in this very kind of traditional structure. And now you're asked to, in industry, be authentic about who you are. Tell me who you are as a person. I want to get to know you, because those interpersonal relationships are actually what drives your ability to get things done. I can't get things done unless I can get people to work with me, to work for me, to move in the same direction that I'm moving. And if I'm that kind of stick, we call it the stick in the spoke, right? If I'm that stick in the spoke who nobody really gets along with, I'm going to slow everything down. And so when you're coming into industry roles, most people recognize this. Most people want to work with people who they can go have a beer with after work. A friend of mine calls it the pub test. Do they pass the pub test? Is this somebody I want to go have a beer with? And so while uncomfortable, that vulnerability and being able to present yourself in a professional but authentic way is hugely prized, because you can directly link it to the performance of the team. So when you're doing hiring, it becomes about how do you pull those things out? So if I look at 100 resumes, 99% of them are going to go through and they're going to describe all their skills and tell why they're such a great technician. But there's 1% of them that are going to tell that, plus they're going to tell me a little bit about who they are as a person. And those kind of characteristics help me understand, is this a person who's going to fit in with the team in an interpersonal way? So are they going to come in and contribute to the dynamic and contribute to how constructive the team is? Are they going to come in and be somebody who's that stick in the spoke, who just grinds everything to a halt and everybody is miserable talking to them? So some of the things that you look for are things like in the personal summary. You're going to be looking for, do they describe themselves in a generic way, or do they talk about their, not only kind of what they bring to the table skill-wise, but do they talk about what their personal motivations are, why they do what they do, and why it matters to them to be part of my team? So for example, when I talk about myself, I'm not going to go in my personal summary and state I'm a business operations professional with 25 plus years of experience working from startup through corporate environments. I am known for my ability to combine psychology and Lean Six Sigma principles to improve operational efficiency. That's boring. That doesn't really tell them anything about me. But if I go in and I'm working for a startup and I'm kind of the person who I can be a little goofy and a little nerdy. I'm very pragmatic in my thinking, so I don't tend to have a huge emotional range in the environments I'm in. Even though, like I said, that former position, I tried that. It did not work well for me. So what I'm going to talk about myself in the personal statement is I'm going to say, data geek and process nerd with a pragmatic leadership style that is focused on helping people be at their best. That tells people immediately who I am as a person, what you could expect from me, and kind of what it's like to work with me too. So that professional summary, that's the first thing people see in the resume. That's what gets them interested and says, not only do they fit what we need from a skills perspective, but like, are they a person who's going to come in and fit in with the team?
You said a lot of things that I would like to touch upon. Just to clarify before we move on, how do you think you should adjust language when you apply for a startup versus a bigger,
Mhm.
more, let's say, more conservative corporate? Because I mean, of course, I would assume, startup, we're a startup. I think it's a very relaxed atmosphere, very flat hierarchy, very kind of like different vibe. I don't know if I'm lacking the word that I'm looking for. Vibe maybe is the wrong word,
Yeah,
but
I think you got it.
yeah, you know what I mean. So what do you think? How would this change a little bit?
Yeah, you can actually see it in the job descriptions when they do the job posting. Look at the language that they're using. Are they using this kind of like catchy, trendy type of language? Or are they using more traditional terminology, more formal language? So you can look at, the tone they use in there to see what is the tone that you should use. And I would really caution people too. If you're gonna work in a traditional company, don't try and mold yourself into something that you're not. If you're a person who really who wants and needs that casual vibe, don't apply for those companies because you're going to go in and you're going to stick out like a sore thumb and probably in a bad way. You're not going to do well there. So, what I would say is rather than that, think about what is the type of work environment that I want to be in, and then look at the tone that they're using in the way that they communicate about their business. That will be present on their website, it will be present in their job ads. When you look at people in their company and go to their LinkedIn's, it will be present in how those people speak and how those people engage online because there are things around social media in industry contracts where it basically says keep it professional online because we don't want you to damage our brand. So there's something that you sign in most companies that talks about their social media policy, and you have to present yourself in a certain way so that you don't inadvertently damage the brand because you're affiliated as an employee, you're affiliated with that company. And so oftentimes companies are going to hire people who innately represent their brand. So what I would say is look for the tone that's used in the job description. Does that tone fit the type of vibe that you're looking for? And if so, then apply and then use the language that you would kind of naturally use to describe yourself. You want to make sure you're not fracturing yourself as a person and as a professional. You're one person. You're not two people. So, what are the things that come naturally to you? What is the way that you interact that comes naturally to you where you don't have to put up these shields and these walls and all this armor? That's exhausting, by the way, and how do you come to work in just kind of a natural way? And that's what you present in your resume.
I love the idea that you find a workplace where you can be yourself, where you don't have to put up this armor and pretend to be someone else all day, every day. It's quite exhausting. It takes a lot of energy. And I guess this is also, it's not necessarily today's topic, but I just want to quickly talk about it because this is something you're really also an expert in. When are people a good fit for a company and what does good fit even mean? It's really like something we try to also teach people find a company that is a good fit because working in an environment that doesn't fit you, that doesn't fit your personality, it can actually be exhausting and lead to burnout. And I think it really goes along with this feeling to having to be someone else when you're actually not.
Mhm.
So find an environment where you really fit and where you can thrive and where you can feel like it's appreciated that you are yourself.
Yeah. It's that's kind of natural intrinsic way that you approach things. And, I hear a lot about the burnout that happens in academia. Burnout can happen in industry too, and it's often for that same reason. And the PhDs we work with, when I talk to them and understand why they're leaving academia, a lot of times it just seems like an issue of fit. It's talked about in a little bit of a different way, but it's the same issue of fit in industry. And so if you're jumping out of a position where you kind of don't have that fit and then trying to mold yourself into fit with the company and industry, you're going to have the same experience, irrespective of, hey, I've gotten out of academia and now I'm in industry. A lot of folks think like, well, if I get into industry and just got paid more, that burnout is going to go away. But I can assure you that that pay scale, there's a place where it's got diminishing returns in terms of your overall job satisfaction. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of not leaping from one problem or one challenge that you're having to and recreating that challenge just in a different environment.
I can imagine it's difficult for people to understand where to, what does authentic self mean and what does a little bit oversharing and too much mean. So how did you figure out for yourself how to be your authentic self and show up as your authentic self without feeling like I'm oversharing right now and it's too personal?
Yeah, it's a hard balance. So the example that I was giving you earlier, I was very blessed in the fact that I had a manager who was very compassionate, and she was just a really solid manager who had a lot of patience with me and gave me a safe space to practice and learn and kind of really understand where those boundaries are. But in general, it's like, what are the things that you're going to get reported to HR for? Like, don't do those things. Don't share those things. And outside of that, you're probably good. So am I going to go and talk about like, things that could result in harassment in the workplace? No, I'm not going to do that. If I'm emotional, am I going to yell at people and scream at them and do things like that? No, I'm not. I'm going to express myself in a constructive way. And so, am I going to demean or demoralize or call people names or start rumors or gossip or any of that stuff? It's like all those are the types of things that you have to be conscientious of. Outside of that, you're pretty good to just kind of come as you are. If you're curious, come and be curious. Ask questions and be unapologetic in asking questions. If you're in an environment that values that, they won't mind. If you're not in an environment that values that, you should probably leave because that's going to get you in trouble at some point. For me, I'm a very direct person. I tend to be very direct. Again, I tend to not kind of have huge emotional range. And there are companies and positions that I've left who haven't been receptive to that. Where I've said, you know what, this is not who I want to be as a leader. And therefore, a lot of my roles at this point in my career are leadership roles. So there have been positions where I've been in there and they've kind of expected me to kind of contort or change myself. And it's kind of like a bad relationship, you know? It's like, I don't want to change those things about me. I like those things about me. Therefore, I'm going to go somewhere that actually appreciates those things. I'm going to go somewhere that appreciates my directness and that doesn't get written up in my performance review as abrasive. By the way, that has happened to me, right? Like, I'm going to go where that's appreciated. And so that's why it's important to really bring yourself to the table and allow them to get to know you, because there are probably things about their company that you don't know and you can't reasonably be expected to know in 2 hours of interviewing, where they look at you and go, you're not going to be really great in this environment because of that thing about you. And so it's better not to waste anybody's time. So I think a lot of people, when they get into the interview process and they're going through these rounds, they're scared of rejection. But rejection can actually be a really, really good thing, and it can prevent you from finding yourself in a position where you're not going to be successful. And so in our business, we talk about this, Elena. It's like qualify people, disqualify potential clients quickly. If they're not a good match, let's make sure that we avoid wasting time and money on both sides so that everybody can focus in on the places where they're going to get the best help for them and where they're going to be the most successful. And so that's not a bad thing. It's just, hey, it's a bad match. It's not an indictment. That's not a judgment on anybody, who anybody is or anybody's identity. And if you talk to a lot of recruiters, they'll tell you the same thing, where it's like, hey, we rejected you, but there's really no like big reason why. It wasn't a match. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just for this environment, it's not a match. And I've seen cases where, there are people who I've worked with in the past who I'm like, I would work again with that person 100%. I would hire them onto my teams. But I've been in certain environments where I've been in hiring situations and go, that person, despite their skill set, would just be a bad fit for this environment. They wouldn't do well. So I'm not going to pull them out of their current position for that reason. And so in some ways, that rejection can be more compassionate than you think, because you look at the person and you go, as great as they are, I just understand based on our work environment that they're not going to do well here, you know? And sometimes that's even me as a manager too. I look at a person and I go, I can't teach that person because stylistically we're so different that I'm not going to be able to learn from them. The team isn't going to be able to learn from them, and they're not going to be able to learn from me or the team. And that's not fair to anybody. So, you know,
I absolutely love that because I think if we can, you know, reframe our mindset about rejection and think of it as redirection, because it's maybe not for you, and maybe you should be actually happy because the other side saw something that wouldn't be a good fit. I think what is a bit hard for us is that we often don't see why these decisions were made. But because it's the interview process is a little bit of a black box for all of us, but I do know that you have implemented interview processes and every question has a purpose, which is for the interviewee on the other side, not necessarily always visible. What are you trying to assess? What are you trying to figure out about me, right? By asking this question. So when you want to evaluate if someone is a good fit for your company, I clearly came to understand now that you also need to know what you're looking for and how to ask the right questions to find out if the person on the other side could be a good fit. So what are typical questions that you would use to see if someone would fit in the team, in the environment, in the company, and would align with what you're doing?
yeah, usually those come in the form of behavioral questions. So, and the reason why behavioral questions are good is because it's really hard to game them. So people who try and game those types of questions, usually they don't give a whole lot of detail because they have to provide examples of situations where they behaved and acted a certain way. And so good answers will have some context, they'll have some kind of depth to them that others don't. And there, so that's one way. Other ways is you might frame the interview process in a certain way or set it up in a certain way to see how people react and respond in the interview process. So I'll give you a couple of examples of both of those. So there was one company that I worked with where there was a lot of context switching throughout the day. You know, most people were working on 10 to 12 projects at any given time. They were very fast-paced projects. So these projects had a turnaround of about 1 to 2 weeks where you're completing research in 1 to 2 weeks. And that's from design through approval with clients all the way through delivering results in 2 weeks. And so it involved a lot of context switching. The days weren't necessarily long, but people who weren't well suited to that environment would often talk about how burnt out they were after an 8-hour day. And that's because of how much the volume and speed of work. So when we talk about speed of work in industry, we're really talking about a high speed that many academics aren't used to because of the length of their project timelines. But the way that we set up our interview process is we set it all in one day. So where a lot of companies would kind of set interviews over multiple days, we would say, okay, well, first you're going to interview with a hiring manager, and then you're going to interview with the peer team, and then you're going to interview with an executive, all back to back, rapid fire. So you're having to switch from the way that you engage from one interview to the next. And this was when we were still doing things in person. But we would bring these people into the office, they would go through, and at the end of the interview, when the recruiter was walking them out to the elevator bay, she would ask them, how did it go? How are you feeling? And you got one of two answers. The first answer was, I really like that, but I'm so exhausted. And the second answer was, that was amazing. I'm so energized and excited. And that was how you could tell, can somebody handle the context switching? Because we put them situationally in an interview process that forced a degree of context switching that was consistent with what they would experience in a workday. And so if somebody said, I'm so tired after that interview process, they got kind of screened out. Now, the other way that you can do it is you can ask behavioral questions. And so some of the behavioral questions are things like, tell me about a time when you disagreed with a colleague. How did you get through it, and what did you learn from that situation? That forces somebody to really think about how they acted and behaved. Some people will make it up and you can kind of tell that they're making it up because there's lots of pauses, there's not a lot of depth, they wind around on themselves, lots of filler words. Other people will give you a very, very straight answer where they say, I had this colleague where we disagreed on this particular approach, and it really caused a point of friction. But what I realized is that the reason why that friction existed was because we had two different styles of communication. And so when I realized that we had two different styles of communication, what I could do then was adjust my style of communication to where they're at so that we're actually speaking from the same plane, right? So that's somebody who is very conscientious. They're self-aware. That's somebody who has done some thinking about situations they've been in. That's somebody who demonstrates a growth mindset because they start talking about the learning and how they adapted. So that's somebody who's also adaptable. That's somebody who's collaborative because they're not trying to force the other person to meet them where they're at. They're going to where the person is at. So from a simple response like that, you can tell a lot about that person. And the reason we can tell that is because you've asked the interview questions of folks who you've hired in the past. If you use a similar set, which a lot of people do, you can then see how that translated into performance. So you can see that kind of line between how they behaved in the interview and what you actually got after you hired them. So you can make those kind of generalizations around if somebody answers this way, it's likely that they're going to act this way in person. So it's not just about what you're saying in the interview, it's how we're comparing that to previous hires who we have and how we would expect those things to play out in our environment. So those behavioral questions can tell you a lot about a person. Another behavioral question I ask is, tell me about a time that you failed and what did you learn from it? There are people who will skirt around that question by actually deflecting the failure onto their colleagues and managers or the company or whatever. If they're deflecting, that tells me that this is a person who doesn't have a growth mindset because they can't, and they probably don't have a high degree of accountability because they can't articulate what their part in the failure was. And if you're part of the team and the team fails, there's a part of it that was yours, right? And so everybody fails. It's okay to talk about failure. If somebody comes in and they're authentically talking about their failures and doing it in a comfortable way, that tells me they've got a self-awareness. And I think a lot of what we're talking about goes back to that self-awareness. When you have an awareness of who you are and when you're comfortable with who you are, being authentic is easy. And so for anyone out there who's trying to figure out how to do this, the first step is develop a self-awareness of who you are and get comfortable with the good side and the bad side. All of us have our upsides and our downsides. My big downside is when I'm stressed out, I tend to get really aggressive in pushing towards result. That puts a lot of pressure on people around me, right? And so, but by being self-aware, I can say, I'm stressed in this situation, so maybe I need to take a step back and self-regulate. Really good things. So that's another reason why that authenticity is important, but it starts with self-awareness and being really comfortable in who you are.
Yes, understanding yourself and how you react in certain situations. Pay attention, next time and reflect, why did I react this way? Can actually be really, really insightful for everyone out there. But this is something you talk a lot about in our course too. So if someone is interested in digging into these interview questions deeper, check out our website. But I want to talk about one more question that a lot of, I think basically, I don't know how much it is used, but I feel like it's used in every interview and no one really knows how to answer it, especially as academics. We struggle a little bit with it. And it's, how do we answer the question, tell me about yourself?
This is the make or break question in every interview. I was talking to a former colleague of mine the other day, and we were talking about this question. And he said, I know in the first 5 minutes whether I'm going to move somebody forward based on their answer to that question. And tell me about yourself question. What most people don't realize, it's a rapport building question. And there's different ways that people answer it. So you got the people who are really long-winded who spend the first 10 minutes of the conversation answering this question. Please don't do that. You're going to lose your interviewer on that question. There are the people, and I think PhDs are particularly susceptible to this who go in, and the first thing they do when you say, tell me about yourself, is they go through and they list out their professional history. Well, I've been this and I've been this and I've done that and I've done that and I've done that. The tell me about yourself question is a rapport building question. It actually is like, hey, we're doing introductions. Who are you as a person? If I were meeting you as a professional in a coffee shop, you wouldn't go and you wouldn't spend 10 minutes introducing yourself. You also wouldn't go and say, hey, hi, I'm Angela. I've been in business for 25 plus years. Here are all the positions that I've held. Here are all the projects that I've worked on. You're going to lose that person so quick. So the way this is like, how do you want somebody to know you as a professional? And so you can say, and you kind of want to blend those two things, but you want to keep it short and succinct. So the way that I do this is like, hey, my name is Angela. And I might say, I've a business operations geek. Don't get me started on that topic because I'll talk about it forever. But I just really love helping people. So when I get up in the morning, my whole day is around, I know it's been a good day if I've helped somebody in that day. And I have a really, really strong pattern recognition, which kind of threads through my career. And it probably comes from the fact that I did a lot of puzzles and played a lot of strategy games growing up. No, I'm not a chess player. That's not my game, but a lot of the other geeky ones I played. But I'm always just kind of drawn to those hard, complex problems, whether it's, helping somebody overcome some kind of perceived barrier in their mind. How do we untangle that? Or whether it's untangling how processes are working in a business. I'm just always drawn to how can I solve and simplify those complex problems. So you can see when I talk about it, I am talking about who I am as a professional, but I'm kind of throwing some stuff in there. And like, oh, hey, I'm a puzzle nerd. Or like, hey, don't get me started on that soapbox because I'll talk about that all day. I'm a little bit of a conversationalist on some of those things. So it tells them a little bit about me. But one thing to recognize is that when you're going into an interviewer, it's a lot of times awkward for the interviewer too. That's a hard situation for anybody to be in. It's awkward on both sides. A lot of times as interviewers, we're nervous too. Am I going to like this person? Am I going to make an impression? We all get the imposter syndrome. So when you come in with kind of one of those like, hey, I'm just a person meeting a person answers, you put your interviewer at ease too. And then you open the door for the interview to become more of a conversation and a discussion than a one-sided or one-directional Q&A.
I love that you said a lot of things, but I think what you really highlighted with your own example is answering the question, tell me about yourself, is really not only about professional achievements, but also, showcase the red thread in your professional career. I mean, you've always loved solving puzzles. I guess you were younger when you did that, but it just shows, it kind of shows up in who you are today. So it becomes relevant for the positions you're applying to. So, Angela, I really wish we had more time, and I wish we could talk about authenticity at the workplace, but maybe we can do that next time. It's always so very exciting. I'm a bit happy that I do not script these calls with you, but of course also it means we're going sometimes in different directions as planned. It was a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much for coming and being here with me today. And thank you to everyone who listened and thought, wow, I would love to learn more about this. Check definitely out our website. We do have courses where Angela teaches how to position yourself, how to show your personality in your CV, but also how to prepare for the interview at the best. And follow us here on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to. If you like it and enjoy it, please leave a review. It will help other PhDs to find us so we can help more people. With this, I hope to see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.